Hello, everybody. Today, for this session, I have picked up a photograph of fairy pools at the Isle of Skye, where I've been last spring, and just fascinated with the ruggedy landscape, with the gorgeous darknesses and the purples and blues of the mountains at the back, I think the black coolings, gorgeous orangey grasses and heathers, this beautiful reflections in the pools, and the whole atmosphere is really dramatic and really exciting. So that's my mission for the session, just to try to bring that atmosphere, that excitement into the landscape. So I'm going to start with doing a sketch. So I have a light purpley ochre type of background to support my painting as a medium tone. And what I'll start with identifying where my water of the pool is going to be. Maybe just a little bit higher than halfway through, maybe just a tiny bit higher than that. Tiny bit higher. Put in the mark. Gives me an opportunity to make the judgment. I'm not using a big board today, so I can play with some of the details and I can see the whole piece quite quickly together. So that will be the group of rocks where the waterfall is going to be. And then I'm going to sketch some of the peaks. I've got the key, lovely shape, pointy pyramid-like peak. The front here, it's a classic. Loads of artists and photographers been using this view in different compositions and different medias. So that will be lovely to sketch it as well and work it out my own way. Some lovely shapes here. I'll just do them quite roughly first, so I can paint the sky and maybe identify that silhouette a little bit better. So that's roughly something there. I've got the other shape, the other mountain, maybe the other side. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more low. There is another peak coming up. Okay. And I like that very beautiful, almost like a notch of a space of the orangey heather, all the grasses here. Okay. And then on the foreground, we see the edge of the banks here, how they come in close. I think the rocks and area, I also have that very rusticy, orangey red color, but a nice rock protruding from the water. And maybe it's coppery, maybe it's something, whatever is in the minerals, creates a beautiful color into the landscape. Okay, I don't like the even 4 similar shapes, so I might need to work into the variety of widths later on. Then at least I'm identifying them now. Okay, when that edge of the pool is going to stay, it's kind of a little bit going in a round, but it's going to stay much more flat. Maybe it's going to go slightly higher here. Got some of the drops here. Okay. So the actual waterfall is going to stay somewhere here. I'll work into the pattern of them, maybe just for the moment. I'll identify some of the major ones. Okay, maybe something there. And then I have a rock in the middle of my photograph, but I'd prefer to move it slightly. And place it on the side. Down a bit more on the side. Okay. Maybe another small rock next to it. Here. Maybe some more protruding rocks. Actually, those protruding rocks could stay as they are, if you're referring to the photograph. Okay. That's kind of balances it out, and it's also gives it a little bit more of that movement. There's another rock coming out from the water, from the shallow part of the water. Some reflections in it as well, but the whole composition then starts to develop. That way it's following here, and then I'll need to make sure it will stay here, maybe with a light or with something else, so I've got that spiral developing. And maybe some of the light on the water, reflections on the water, either give some more extra radiating feel for getting that spiral going. Maybe some reflections, maybe that's a shadow from the darker shadow of the rocks. Okay, so I'm happy with the composition there. I think I could put another little rock here just to get that spiral going a little bit more. Okay, maybe something there. And the rest might be with some light there, playfulness. Okay. That's good, maybe a tiny bit drop the actual waterfall. I think by the time I'll get the darkness of it, will just gain that little bit of space. And yes, that would be good. Okay, so my sketch is finished. And let's work in some tone and let's work in some color. Right, I'm going to use now a flat brush, a small flat brush, and I'll work into my sky. So I have some white, some phthalo blue. Okay, and let's identify some of the paler blues, medium blues, dark blues. Let's work into the sky. Maybe find some other similar colors elsewhere, maybe in the water, some of the reflections. Okay. So first of all, let's put a little mark on the sky and see if that is light enough. Yes. So the background color gives me immediately some depth. If I would have been painting in white, that shape of the sky would have been slightly harder to, well, you needed to do more work to see that depth. So the mountains are immediately jumping towards us. Okay. There are some lighter tones and darker tones. Let's just start with some of the in-between ones. So I'm looking for my photograph as a starting point. If I'll end up with slightly different sky, that's totally fine. If I want to look for character mountains, the specific very famous fairy pools, so the silhouette of the mountains will be quite iconic. So if I'll suddenly make them maybe bigger or less steep, or some of the curvatures will be very, very different, then it will be just mountains. It's not going to be specific ones, specific area. So in this case, I'm going to pay a bit more attention to that. Tiny bit more darker. so starting with a little bit of darkness, and then I'll go with much more darker at the top. Sometimes I work, so for example, with the sky now, I started here to look more for the fine line, the silhouette of the mountains. I think here, because my mountain is going to be much darker, I can abandon that idea and actually work with my darker tones afterwards. Maybe just focus on my sky more, so I can bring slightly different blues deliberately lower than my outlines, so then my sky will look much more naturally. Gets a bit of light in there. Using some ultramarine to get a bit of depth to it, a bit of volume, and maybe the same here, but maybe slightly different blue. Okay, fellow blue more dominating here. We'll just make it lighter. Quite like that depth. Maybe if I do one stroke darker and blend it with my acrylic while it's still light. Okay, and let's blend the rest of this corner. So I'm building the volume of the sky and clouds. Clouds will be coming up shortly in more details. I'm using quite a bit of paint straight away because it's a small area. I can see how it's going to be developing. I don't really need to come back to that sky later on. If I can do it more or less in one go. I quite like that, but I think I might need a tiny bit more light somewhere here. Tiny bit more light here. Some of the blues is drying now, becoming a bit more harder to mix. It's a tiny bit more water. And the sky is lighting up. Now I can put a bit more light. Now the sky in the photograph did come out quite bold. I don't want to end up with very white areas. Otherwise it will be glowing, and I want to have my waterfalls having more of the attention than the sky. So let's just work with an overall light. Maybe something here. Okay, maybe it's gonna be too light again. Becoming a bit flat. So I can just work it a little bit more. Okay, now I'm starting to see other shapes I don't like. Start to have one line, another one, another one, another one. So that one, that one. Let's get some more light here. Maybe do something more exciting with the movement here. Another mountain peak has gone, but I think I'll bring it back quite happily later. Okay. Trying to do a bit of, not perfection, but I'm just seeing loads of similarities and marks So I want to have that variety to be there before I leave it. Okay, that's better. Okay, that's better. Still a little bit of similarities here. I'll put more water on my brush. It's not going to be dry brushing then. I know if I'll keep seeing shapes which I don't want to have in my work, I'll see loads of, let's say, repetitive marks or repetitive shapes or similarities in them. My mind wouldn't stop and I'll keep working into them and they just still keep happening. Okay, I'm getting slowly there. So I might paint and repaint it as many times as needed. Just losing a bit of depth there. Again, the marks are quite similar, but let's soften them. Let's soften them. Okay, there's something more geometric happening. Okay, I think I'm getting happier with that. Some of these directions of the lines, I know they will be competing with my mountains. I'll do a couple of more lighter strokes here and maybe I'll leave it to dry and compare them when the mountains are finished. Okay. That's what I'll do, the tiny bit more darker tone in the corner here. And the corner here. Then that white cloud is not going to stay permanent. Going as a similar shape down. Okay, that's better. And I said I'm going to bring some of that paler blue across. I'll just use a slightly bigger brush and use maybe a bit more watery acrylic because I will be painting maybe some stones or some reference to the stones. Okay, a little bit more white. Okay, so if I'll get more water to it now. So let's, it might not be the right color, the right darkness, but let's just do it as a first placement of lighter tone reflecting the sky. And I can work with it afterwards. Some nice lights coming around here. So I like to keep some of that shape to get that spiral. Okay, this rock might have, again, in the photograph, it's illuminating quite a lot. But I might keep it slightly darker. Tiny bit more white. I'm going to have loads of highlights. In this central part. paint is very loose and quite watery. And then it's could go slightly vague. This could be quite nice dark shapes of light on the water. So I'm going to leave the current background. Maybe a hint of violet here. Let's see if that's going to be light enough. Nope. I want it to be more of a shadow, but at the same time, I don't want it to be as dark as my previous mark was there. So if I'll just do some sort of hint on the marks for the stones and the water. Okay, so those will be protruding from the water rocks. So I'm going to have two types of light on the water. The most light, the one I've done in pale blue at the moment. The middle type of medium tone of this almost browny violetty color. I'm going to have a darker one from some of the shadows and some of the very dark reflections that will come a bit more here. So let's identify anything which could stay pale. Some of these protruding rocks will still have a similar color because they're reflecting, or they've got the water on top of them and they stay together here. Okay, and maybe a bit more darkness now. Now for the moment, I think I'm gonna go for violet and ochre and maybe some ultramarine. Let's do some immediate shadows here. So these sections of the water, picking up the shadows from the mountains above, and some of the stones here will be lighter than that reflection. Okay, that's another reflection here. That's a bit of reflection from the shadow. Well, we're going to have both. We're going to have reflections and shadows on the water. Just gently work around some of the stones. It's kind of hidden segments, right? And then we're going to have some shadows. They will come out even darker, but for the moment I'm going to preserve them in a similar color and a similar tone, so I can plan my shapes here. I can plan what's going to happen to the elements of the water, the elements of the reflection. Okay, I might lift my board in a moment. I'm just going to touch up this corner. Just adjust the size of the angle of the board. Right, now let's work a little bit more into the mountains. So I want to get some darker tones into the mountains. I can see the silhouettes close to the sky. Has a lot of blue. There's a lot of violets. We've got those combination of the colors, and then it's almost like a moonlight or a bit of snow, a bit of not so much snow, but frost. So let's just work within some of those tones. Right, I think that's we'll need to go darker. Let's work into this corner. Okay, I think I might need a smaller brush to get the definition here. Okay, if I'll get my silhouette sorted, I can then vary them. The color. So a little bit more going down. A bit more blue here. At the same time, I have to keep certain shapes dark, so it's a bit of a balance of how much light and dark is going to be there. If I have more blue, when I'm adding some ochre, the whole color becomes green. So if I'll add a bit more crimson, that should bring it back to a bit of warmth. It's a nice darker ridge here. We'll see if it's too dark on. You can see some lovely dark blues here as well. So let's move to some more blues. Don't want them to be overly solid. I can see where some extra darker tones going to be, so I'm going to keep them slightly lighter. If I'll do my marks along the shape of the ridges, that will be easier to identify its structure. Now have some paler blue. I have a couple of friends who have climbed these mountains. Had wonderful experience of being there. I just walked there, which I would love to climb when I'm advanced with my climbing skills, but I'm not quite there yet. It's a bit more light. That frosty blue, grey. and in between. That might be too dark. I'll just soften it. Something in between in darkness, but it's definitely developing within that triangle. And there is some light. So I'm going to add a bit more ochre and using that shade of crimson. And maybe some extra white for the lighter, warmer ridge. Just check if I've got enough light in there. So then it stands out. Yeah, it looks very similar to my board. I don't quite want that. I want maybe a little bit more color in that. Even if it's going to be exaggerated color. And then that will be the coolness of it again. Okay, let's bring some of that color across as well. Okay, so some structure slowly started to happen. Now these colors are soft. I can just integrate them a little bit more. I want to bring a little bit of warmth here as well before all the coolness starts. And before I do all the dark, cool shadows to wrap these mountains together, I'm going to create a lovely orangey color using some ochre, white and crimson for my grasses and heather. That's a lovely coppery tone. That's it. That's nice and strong. You can do slight variations of it, maybe a little bit more light, the boldness of it, maybe a little bit more yellowness and part of it. Got this rock here, which has that similar presence of color, maybe with a bit more darker shadows in it and a bit more darker reds, but it kind of keeps it together under the same color scheme. And now I'm going to go for a bit more red to continue some of this. some of this color. And then it could also come here, maybe even stronger and bolder. Almost as fresh crimson for just few marks. That will frame it much more stronger. I just put a few marks and then they will be a little bit lost when I start painting. That fiery edge, maybe a bit more, maybe less bold if I'll have a tiny bit of that softer violet, neutralize it a little. And then some of them heathers could be on top of these dark shapes, so need to make sure that they are dark. Quite like that fire there. I'll see if I can keep it mainly in one area. But underneath of it, I can put a tiny bit of darkness. Maybe a hint of violet now. Now I've done the major bolder lights. Again, I'm going to try to vary my marks so they are not too repetitive. Okay, the color's fresh. Again, love those nice strokes. Again, I don't want them to be similar parallel ones. Okay, let's break that one down. I don't think that was part of the ridge here. Although I like that orangey edge of the heather, I need to have some softness to it. And the shadow on the base, I think that's going to be another part of the heather. And let's do something similar to this edge, but I think I'm going to have less of the orange, but I'm going to move more into the blues because we have a slightly different light here, and those contrasts will be becoming different. So overall, they do appear slightly bluer. I'll probably will do some paler shadows, paler grays. Good. Also just spotted a nice color on my rock here. I think that looks quite similar to some of the colors I'm doing now. So similar color, just making it slightly lighter and darker, creating some of those silhouettes. I don't want any letters M's. There was a too symmetrical shape. Another little rock here. I'll have to give it a slightly better shape, maybe by doing a shadow. We'll see it better there as well. And maybe if I'll use this same color with small amount of ochre, I can make a relatively similar color for the rock here, maybe a tiny bit lighter at the top. I might eventually make it slightly lighter than the water, but I don't want to rush. Because there are loads of changes to the rock stone here, and it might visually make it unviable, undoable, and so just look inside out, painted slightly oddly. It's a bit too bold. Let's do a little bit more blue. Don't want too much violet there. I want a nice intensive shadow, that's better. Probably the marks of the water in combination of the roughness of the stone, reflections of the water, and all sorts of other things. So I can make it stand out this end a little bit stronger as a silhouette. Okay, now I've got that color. I'll touch it up on the corners of this rock reflections. And start having a little bit of that water, the feel of the water, the depths of it, or at least, well, it doesn't have to be very deep, but we can see it's under the water and it creates all these lovely patterns. Very suggestive patterns. Without us knowing totally what it is, that sharpness of the lines, the deeper color. Is that the rock which protrudes out of the water? Is it under the water? That's quite nice too. Play with imagination. Can make that one a bit paler. And then again, give it another go on that water reflection and some stones there. Maybe in a bit more softer. I think some of the stones and the water come up a little bit too solid. Okay, we'll see where that stone's going to take us later on. Right, my rock becomes more and more round, but I can trim it with the edge of the water later on. So while I have these similar colors, the stones and the water stones could be perfect way to be painted. Like some, you can see some lovely orangey stones as well, orangey reds, but then the water there a bit more and gentle in the boldness of the pigment. Okay. So I started from the mountains. I ended up doing some shadows because the color took me there. So now let's come back and do the boldness of the mountains. Maybe that's how that rock will be trimmed here. And that smaller protruding shape. Will stand out as well. Well, that the color is going, I can see how it's could influence other, can influence other shapes and at the same time connect them together. Okay, that's good. That's it. Okay, right, let's stop a tiny bit more here and let's move on to the mountains. Come back to these shapes slightly later. That's coming on quite nicely. loads of pale whites happening. Maybe they will stay in its tonal decision, but maybe not in color. I'll have to make that judgment slightly later. Right, so the mountains need to have more coolness to them. So ultramarine, maybe still small amount of violet, but ultramarine will be a major color, maybe tiny bit too strong, a bit too blue. I think if I'll make it tiny bit more into indigo, so a hint of black with it, but I want to keep the tone not solid dark, but into the paler blue, kind of chromatic grayish blue. Okay, that's looking better. A nice dark shape in the corner. A little bit of light joining, okay, not as much as that, but a little bit of light breaking that shape at the top, so that could be reduced. Looks too rigid as a line, too parallel, that shape, so Now this one looks a little bit too rigid, so if I'll put something in between, maybe not as dark, but just a little dip. Directions of these lines will be very important, as it does change the terrain. That's only just catching the light. I use a tiny bit more water with my current blue. Okay, I've got quite a lot of paint here on the brush. Just gonna make it flat on my bristles. And now some of the coolness will come from that edge. And then the dark will come down in varieties of blues. Just need to make sure I mix them thoroughly. I don't want any patchiness. Because the individual shapes will be plenty in its variety of interest. I don't want any marbling effect taking away the attention. That's going to stay a little paler. And maybe some of the middle sections here could have slight darkness. Yeah, I need to be careful not to work with the same brush and end up with a similar. That's nice. I want similar marks, similar indentations. A little bit of violet here now with my white. Maybe a hint of ochre red. So that's the type of color I'm looking for, but much lighter version of it. I think I could do with a small brush now. Touch up the ridge and possibly even lighter version here. Just a little highlight here. I like that. Lovely. I think similar something could happen. Tiny bit more here when I can just subdivide some of the ridges at the base. Maybe even use some of that orangey color to influence some of the warmth. Nice and exciting. Those little changes are happening. Fabulous. Now let's have a look at some of the similar color of the rocks. A bit more in the foreground, close to the water. Might have some range of grays and range of orangey tones, maybe slightly lighter. But it could be slightly light against my background. Might need to have some darknesses there first before I paint it lighter. Let's paint it slightly darker first. Some coolness, cooler shadows. A little bit of indigo. Indigos violet. So let's just block it and let them dry. Can paint over some of them, but I think I might. It's harder to paint around shapes. Easier to introduce those shapes together as those specific marks. Let's just do a tiny bit lighter line by the water and paint all of this section together before I come back to it and make it full of beautiful texture rocks. So I'll need it to dry. And I can also touch up my stone here. I think it might be a much smaller stone that I initially planned, because I could create some depth behind it. Maybe part of the cave there where the waterfalls are going to be. Maybe more solid shadows, maybe a bit of both. Okay, there's a little lighter beach later on as well. Okay, let's just plan that one for now. And a little bit of then this color could travel for some of the gaps between the waterfalls. So if I'll keep them as overall shapes in tone, then I can decide how they develop and what's going to happen to them. So I'm going to create a little rhythm of darknesses. I prefer to make them more, maybe larger, because I can always paint over them with highlights of the water. Let's do a little bit more deeper subdivision of tones in this corner. And now I want a little bit more paler blues. As much as I want to have very dark tone, if I don't have some paler colors, I'm not going to be able to build up my beautiful shadows. That range needs to stay as a variety. Okay, so then on top of that pale color, I could have a bit more darker color. Can have some darkness on top of the lighter shapes. Right, I've lost where my waterfalls are going to be here. So I think here I'll paint all of it together and then subdivide it once I've got my highlights. I think that might be a better option. But I know here where's stronger shapes of darks, beautiful indigo. Might need to correspond with my blues here. And I think that darkness on the rocks also gives me an idea of making the water slightly darker than what it is. Maybe in some of the places here in the corner. There'll be loads of highlights of splashing water, but to make those highlights, I need to offset it with something darker. So I'm preparing that base for it, that foundation. It's good, love that. Varieties of marks, that's all really exciting. Beautiful strokes. Maybe a couple of darker ones somewhere here. All right. And let's do a tiny bit of shadows under some of the heather. I think my background is almost done. My foreground is developing beautifully. So it's middle ground and the waterfalls now need some attention. So I just fill some of the gaps here. So they're not going to be jumping at us. Create some extra shadows if we need them. Maybe something in between. This is not my fresh orangey red. I have a little bit of bordering color. But hopefully that will give me, okay, still too strong. This will give me a shadow, color for the shadow here. I want the fire, but I want it bearable fire, which will stay and point towards the center rather than breaking down and taking attention. So I need to contain some of these colors. Okay, that's better. It's a little bit more natural as well. I'll put a tiny bit of highlights maybe on the top. So I'll move it a tiny bit more forward, but not interrupt with the colors at the back. And then my rusty stone could have some extra shadows in it. I have more plans for it for later. I need more fresh white so I can make a fresher orange. So some fresh orange coming up, some white, some fresh ochre, some red. And maybe some more white. And more. Want to mix the color really well, maybe a tiny bit of warmth from ochre. So I need a couple of strokes to lighten up something here in the center. On the screen they appear a bit more yellowy than they actually are. So I'm happy with what they are, and I'm going to leave that. Here I can soften a little bit more the boldness of the yellow, and I can also use whitish, just an off-white color for the highlight of this rock here. I'll just put a couple of lines. Okay, and we've got the highlight, and we also have some pebbly beach behind it, which will give a little trail of light. And also a gentle depth between the darker rocks. Okay, that's nice depth there. Just soften this sharp shadow. And maybe a little line showing that a tiny bit of reflection next to the edge of the rock. Again, it's a small nuance, but hopefully that's all. Will be. Keeping it together as a shadow, as a reflection, as the stones behind it. Kind of got that connection. I'll have some more highlights on the water here as well. And that gives me an opportunity to put some of the first bold reflections in the water before I do the waterfalls. So they're still not the whitish shapes. I want to preserve some of the pale blue. I want to also bring some boldness of light as well. So I have some of the shapes created by these varieties of darks and lights and different colors. So I might use some of it. Okay, here we can have a tiny bit of blue definitely. Again, I need to create a texture which will start representing what's under the water, but at the same time the highlight produced by the rocks around it. That's a lovely highlight. And I can just soften the busyness of the lines above these rocks. Maybe I'll remove one of them. Tiny bit more darker blue. And I can paint over this top of the rock. I wanted to trim, its shape. The blue will help me now to show the darkness of the water. I think I might put a tiny bit of that blue here. My brush around. So I've got the right tones, maybe just slightly varying the color. That's beautiful. It's suddenly the water is coming over these stones much more stronger. I think that darker blue is doing the trick. Just need to be careful not to overdo it. play enough with the reflections. But not to lose the shapes. So this blue hopefully will bring some of the shapes together. I think I need to be darker. That's what's happening. It's making them a tiny bit lighter. By lighting it up, it's changing its tone. I want to keep that darkness. Oops, where did I get? Oh, it's quite a strong pigment by accident. Connect this blue with this blue. Still a little bit of pale blue left. I like that. I want to preserve it here. Tiny bit more sharpness. That's lovely. And that's good as well. I think that's working. That's working well. Good, now that's rock extra settled. And I need to work on my waterfalls. So hopefully that area is all dried. And again, I'll work into some of those blues as my starting color. I'll go for darker version, bluey violet, bluey gray. Just identify some of the major shapes, and then I'll go lighter. Okay, so let's do different steps of them as well. So slightly wider top, slightly different step. Just do them all together, and then I can tweak and decide what I'm missing, or maybe what's need to be worked into. Little different heights. Okay, that's basic early shapes here. That's something spreading. Tiny bit wider. That's a lovely, almost dry brushing technique. The brush is damp, but it gives me still a little mark, almost like chalky mark. I like that quality. As if I were to work with some chalk. Okay, so let's do some of these ones now as well. And my brush is slightly spreading differently. The bristles create that texture, so that's quite nice. I'm going to use that as my advantage. As it splits. Oops, red. That's not good. Let's have some fresh. Let's have some more fresh blue here. Bluey, gray, bluey, violet, but quite light. Let's do pink. That's better, but let's see if it's the right darkness. Don't want it to be too dark. I'll just dry my brush slightly and come back to the shapes. Yeah, it's a bit more bolder, which is good. I'll just tweak the volume of paint on the brush if I want to do some small nuances. Now this is quite nice. This is getting from slightly wider and at the top to a narrow one, and most of the other waterfalls are going from narrow to wide at the bottom. I'm going to keep a little bit of fresher white to show there's water there. Some of the twists of the lines. I just want to do it quite soft, quite delicate. Before I'll go bolder white. Right, there's another one somewhere here. And before I'll dry my brush, actually tiny bit my hair as well first. Break it down with another gentle line. Okay, so that's nice. Love those shapes. That's great. So let's top it up with a lighter layer, because it's a key element in my painting. That's all it's about. Those waterfalls, the whole fairy pools are created by those waterfalls. So if I'll pay attention to the details. Then I can tweak the rest, what's left around the painting. So again, maybe starting with now smaller lines, maybe just pressing on the brush gently. Tiny bit more water on the brush. For a better flow. And the moment I have less paint on my brush, the strokes become much more broken. It's good for some of the waterfalls, but I also need to have some solid lines as well. So I'm still working into those tones. Don't want to hide everything under the same darkness. Hopefully the camera does catch some of it. If not, maybe the photograph later on will. Let's go for some fresher whites. Maybe little corners, touches up. The marks are getting smaller. It's a little bit trickier to get to them, so I think I'm going to change the size of my brush. To even smaller one. First, let's wash this area a little. It's split a little bit too wide. Okay. And also some of the tones here is harder to see, so I might need to come back and subdivide it. Because if I will lose those darknesses, I will lose the depth of it. So I might introduce some of the stones. I'll do a couple of marks. The whole area is quite wet here. I might have to come back to it when they dry. The worst case scenario for me, everything is becoming too white or losing its textures. I'll just paint it all dark as I did earlier on and begin the process again, which is not a big deal. If we want to create a beautiful painting, we've got the time to pay attention to its most beautiful segments. Okay, that's quite nice as well. Maybe I could do a little gap here. Okay, let's leave it there for the moment. Let it dry. And let's do a tiny bit of highlights on my rock on the left hand side at the bottom. Let's do some of those, almost like stones individually standing. Almost as if it was a wall, or it's so beautifully cracked from the whole shape. So now if I leave the gaps, they will create those shadows I wanted initially. Then I don't need to pay too much attention to those shadows that create themselves. Tiny bit dark as I'm going further away from that source of light, maybe little stones in between. Okay, that's maybe too light here. Okay, let's do a tiny bit more marks there. Come back to slight darkness at the bottom here. Stand with the camera like that. On the tops of these sections, then it's okay, it's better. The rest of the area is staying quite plain, but if I'll use slightly cooler, lighter tones just to show it is still, the texture is still there, but because of the shadow we're losing that connection. Is looking too similar. Okay, that's good. Right, let's have a look. I'm just going to touch up some of, I think some of these lighter tones are too jumpy. So stepping away gives me an idea that they might need to be softer, not come out so significantly. And And then I can look back at the rest of the painting as piece and check if anything else is missing. Okay, maybe some shadows on rocks in the water, some of the smaller rocks. Touching up some of the sharper shadows. Now, if some of my rocks protruding from water will start being part of the texture of the water, that's fine because they're all part of that environment. Just need to make sure that that is what I want and that's how it will stand out better. Don't like that fork. But a little bit of light on its own looks strange. That's much pale and more belonging to the environment. Tiny bit of darker blue, I think, here. I'm actually quite liking now the waterfalls. They're not too bold white, but there is enough light in them. They're drawing much more stronger in contrasts, and that's exciting. But I think I can do connection of that light with somewhere on the top of this rock. And some of the rocks pulling off part of that hot section of the rocks. I think I can do a tiny bit more darker shadows close to the waterfalls. Not much, but to give them last final depth. My violet, my red, my ochre, all stained together. Now I have a smaller brush to move about. Let's do a couple of stronger contrasts. painting in between kind of some of the rocks, or just creating extra edges. That's where some of those extra darks could come, so it doesn't look like it's water. So final little touch-ups. That's a lovely move. Tiny bit more stronger step. Yeah, and last couple of strokes of white. Just want to have maybe on the water. I think I'll leave the waterfalls as they are. I think they're looking actually better than I expected. So I'm gonna go for some fresh white for the last touch-ups on the water reflections. So just loading the brush with fresh white, making sure it's going to give me some glow. And I'll do it under the waterfalls where that water is crashing. A little bit more here. Tiny bit more fresh white. A little bit bigger pool of white. And some nice ripples. Not much ripples, more reflections of what's in the sky, or just glimpses of some whites. That's it, and that's hopefully follows my intended spiral of everything coming here and then staying in this area. So those my highlights going to remain here. That's it. That's done. I'm very happy with the outcome. I'm going to try to lift it up gently so you can see it a bit better. Let's see if it's reflecting now or not. That's better. The paint is not as wet. So I'm quite happy with that development of the beautiful coppers, coolness of it, gorgeous violets, really, really exciting texture, big marks, little marks, Gorgeous strokes. Very, very happy. Thank you for joining me tonight.